Verse
with
1.
gross household disposable incomes falling 6.1% in the worst per capita recession since the Great Depression. Once upon a time, we believed in the great Australian dream, where home ownership could lead to a better life and was an expression of success and security. That dream is now impossible for the average person, not because of one's lack of talent, skill or ability, but because of simple mathematics. In Sydney now, it took last month 46 years to save for an average house deposit, not the house, the deposit. Actually, with the latest numbers that came out, it's probably over 50. So if you start saving at 20, you'll have enough money for a deposit by the age of 70. But of course, by then, the house will have a zero on its price tag. The great Australian dream has become a great Australian scream. No longer do Australians have a fair go. Once upon a time, we believed in the great Australian dream, where home ownership could lead to a better
Basically,
life.
this snippet pretty much is saying housing affordability is not really there.
Yeah.
How do you see that trend?
It's always going to go up. Housing has always been unaffordable to a lot of people. I mean, yeah, we're in that situation now where housing, like he says on there, is 17 years just to afford a deposit. Like me personally, I don't think a house is actually a good investment. Personally, I don't think it's a good investment, purely because it's good for some people if it's forced savings, and obviously it's a forced sort of way of making sure that your savings is secure in the future. But from an affordability point of view, yeah, I don't think it's going to get any better. And I think if anything, it's just an age-old problem that we're always going to have. Problem is with that is, where do these people live, and how are we going to house these people? Because there's always people influxing into Australia. So yeah, it's always going to be a problem, unfortunately. But yeah, personally, I wouldn't buy a house for myself. I don't personally own a house that I live in, and I don't plan to buy a house that I'm going to live in the future. Maybe at one stage I will do, because it's an emotional decision, but it's not a financial decision. So, and from an emotional perspective, it makes sense because it's all warm and fuzzy and it's somewhere for you to live and it's nice and safe. But from an actual financial position, it's probably one of the worst financial decisions you can make in regards to actually investing into something, because that money could be used for so much more, and you can leverage that money so much more if you're buying an investment versus buying somewhere to live. That's my personal view, obviously.
Which flows on to the next segment.
Yeah.
You could quickly have a listen.
Government policies are destroying the ability for young Australians to not just own a home, but also destroying their ability to have kids. It's obvious to say it, but research demonstrates that couples in single-family homes show significantly higher fertility rates than those in apartments, even years after moving. Surprise, surprise. Spacious, family-friendly housing environments encourage childbearing. So if we have policies that promote affordable access to larger family-orientated housing, we will likely get higher fertility levels. Conversely, economic pressures that force families into smaller apartments will likely suppress fertility rates to not just own a home.
It's interesting that his take was, the smaller space, like apartments, as opposed to standalone homes, is so much smaller to raise children in. And so he made the comparison there and saying, people are not choosing to have kids because of the pressure.
Yeah, and I would say that's probably correct as well. Like, people are choosing not to, or they're having them later in life, and by then sometimes it's too late, so the fertility may be dropping from that aspect as well. Yeah, I think it is a stress for a lot of people. Like, even personally, I didn't want to have a child unless I could afford it. So for me, like, I waited, and obviously, yeah, we've sort of waited for a certain period of time, and it just sort of happened that obviously we were stable. But yeah, would I have one at, say, 20 years old? No, I wouldn't. So yeah, there's different aspects to that, I would say. There's different elements to that I suppose, statement that you can argue for and against. But yeah, I think it's true. Like, people are waiting because of the cost of living in general is too high to even think about education. I mean, if you look at education, what is it from birth to 18 is something like close to £180,000, I think it is, something like that for a standard education. Anything more than that, you're looking at sort of close to $500,000 if you're looking at private schools. So yeah, it's a big financial burden for a lot of families.
For sure, and that's only one child.
Exactly.
So if you have another one and a third one, then
it can definitely add up. Definitely, yeah.
One last and final segment.
His girlfriend on New Year's Eve. If you remember, the government's going crazy gaslighting the public that violence had spiralled out of control. I thought, hang on, hadn't George Soros, the tourism minister, proclaimed that Sydney has just won the safest and friendliest city in the world award? Both tragedies, sure, but how does that justify shutting down this entire city's nightlife? The truth soon emerged. It was never about our welfare, but rather a desire for casino patronage and to clear the way for property development. All to demolish for apartments, but apartments for who exactly? Hold on to that thought, we'll come back to that later. Now drama dogs are every step. Australia Day sparks outrage, global events become local crises. We've become a nation on edge where calm is the exception and conflict is the new normal. Our spirit of rebellion and irreverence, the very essence of what it means to be Australian, has been crushed by a deluge of stupid laws, rules and regulations. No Australian actually wants any of this crap, yet the government keeps ramming it down our throats.
Yeah, so we have this thing in Sydney where there's like lockdown rules.
Okay.
Like after a certain amount of time, all businesses have to shut down. But you know, what this keynote speaker is saying, it's to pave way, you know, to developers knocking down these businesses because they can't survive without having that nightlife. And to build more apartments on, which somewhat also ties into the first segment, which is can't afford, but they want to develop more.
Yeah.
It's like this cycle of like the top few percent of people making the money.
Of course.
But the average Australian can't afford.
Yeah. I think it all sort of ties together perfectly.
Yeah.
Obviously, like at the end of the day, someone's making money out of this. Who is making money? Generally, it's a developer.
Yeah.
Developers don't necessarily need to sell all of their properties or sell all of their development to make their profit back. So for them, it doesn't really matter, I suppose, like in regards to whether they sell them all or whether they don't sell them all. From a obviously economical point of view, is it worth actually building these cookie cutter apartments? Probably not, because it's not a great lifestyle for most people to have. Like, yeah, I know we're sort of moving more towards them high-rise sort of apartment buildings, and people are sort of happy to live in these high density sort of buildings, but is it really the best lifestyle for everyone? Probably not. It's more sedentary, you're sort of more isolated. Yeah, it's not a great place to be, I would say, and especially if, for instance, you have another lockdown, then that's definitely not a place where you want to be.
Yeah.
Psychologically, I'm sure it's definitely got some impacts on people, and I think long lasting, I think it will do as well.
Yeah.
From a development point of view, yeah, I don't think it's the right way to go, but yeah, we don't make the rules, I suppose, do we?
But thank you for sharing all your experiences with the audience, and even though, you know, we have trends that are somewhat, I think a lot of us feel helpless on, but there's individuals like yourself that are so mindful of what it takes to succeed and what it takes to run the business, and working 7 days a week, like at the beginning, to keep going.
Yeah.
To keep the business afloat, and I'm curious to see, like I said, your watch collection, and hopefully a chance to talk about future investment ideas.
I think my biggest message to people is bet on yourself. Don't be afraid to not bet on yourself, because you'd be surprised what you can actually get out of it. Like there's a really sort of mindful quote that I love, and it's literally, how big would you dream if you knew you couldn't fail? And it's like, just go for it. Just if you've got a dream, go for it. Do it. Because what's the worst that can happen? You're back in stage one again 2 years later, 3 years later when it hasn't worked out, but at least you can go through life not saying what if.
Yes, and not wonder.
No, and you can't do that. Life's too short. You've got to take them risks sometimes.
Yeah. So onwards and upwards for your business, and hopefully Specsavers is, there to stay.
Yeah.
Under your wing.
I'd like to think so. Yeah.
And looking forward to our next conversation.
Okay. Cool.
So thank you for coming on, and
Thank you again.